You speak Viking every single day, and you have no idea. Sky, egg, knife, window, husband, every one of those words is Old Norse, left behind by the most feared raiders in history. 4 days of your week are named after their gods, and even the Bluetooth in your phone is a dead Viking king's initials. Everyone says these people vanished 1,000 years ago, in one bloody week in 1066, so why won't they get out of your Tuesday? Here's my take, and it's the whole reason I made this. The Vikings never vanished. They lost their ships and their gods, and then they did something sneakier, they moved in. By the end of this, you won't see them as ancient history. You'll realize you've been carrying them your whole life. But here's the strange part. The man who won that week, the man history calls a Norman, was secretly a Viking himself. So the people who supposedly ended the Viking Age were Vikings. Hold on to that. It's the twist this whole story turns on. Now picture the week. A Norwegian giant named Harald Hardrada lands in northern England with a war fleet. Men call him the last great Viking, and they are not exaggerating. On the 25th of September, the English king, Harold Godwinson, catches him at a river crossing called Stamford Bridge. It is a slaughter. Hardrada is cut down, by some accounts an arrow through the throat. The Norwegian invasion dies with him in the mud. England has just crushed the Vikings. 300 years of terror over in an afternoon. Except it isn't. 19 days later, a third king lands in the south. Harold, exhausted and bleeding, turns his army around and marches the whole length of England to meet him. The place is called Hastings. And on the 14th of October, Harold loses everything. His army, his crown, his life. So did the Vikings really end in 1066? Or did they just win, wearing a new name? To answer that, we rewind almost 300 years to a quiet island on a summer morning when the whole nightmare began. The 8th of June, 793. Off the northern coast of England sits a tiny island called Lindisfarne. On it, a monastery. One of the holiest places in Christian Europe, the shrine of St. Cuthbert, full of gold and silver and unarmed monks. That morning, sails appear on the horizon. The men who come ashore are like nothing Europe has seen. They do not come to trade or settle. They kill the monks, snatch the treasure, seize prisoners to sell, and vanish back out to sea before anyone can stop them. A scholar named Alcuin was horrified. He wrote that the church of St. Cuthbert was spattered with the blood of the priests of God. Nobody even had a word for these raiders yet. The Franks called them Northmen. But history remembers them by the Old Norse word for what they did out on the water. Viking, to go raiding. Say the word Viking, and you probably picture a giant in a horned helmet. Drop that image right now. Because no horned Viking helmet has ever been found. Not one. In over 1,000 graves, in every dig, nothing with horns. The only near complete Viking helmet we have ever dug up from a place called Germanbu in Norway is a plain, rounded iron cap. So where did the horns come from? A costume designer. In the year 1876, for a German opera by Richard Wagner, somebody drew horns on the singers, and the world never let go. The scariest warriors in history are famous for a hat they never wore. They were not filthy barbarians either. Their graves are full of combs and tweezers, and English writers complained the Danes bathed too often and dressed too well. And they were not one nation, but 3 separate, often rival kingdoms, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, who raided each other as happily as everyone else. Most Norse never raided at all. They were farmers, traders, and poets. So what turned a handful of these farmers into the terror of Europe? One invention, the longship. A long, low boat of overlapping oak planks, light enough to cross open ocean and then row straight up a river into your town. No compass, no maps. They steered by the sun, the stars, and the flight of birds. And when those sails came over the horizon, there was nowhere far enough inland to be safe. For decades, it stayed hit and run. Raid a monastery, burn a village, sail home rich. But in the year 865, that changed. The Vikings stopped visiting. They came to stay. A huge coalition landed in England, remembered as the Great Heathen Army. By legend, it was led by the sons of a Viking hero named Ragnar Lothbrok, come to avenge their father. But be careful here. Most historians think Ragnar never existed as one real man, that he is a legend stitched together from several different warriors. His supposed sons, though, were real enough, and they were coming for a kingdom. This army rolled over England. It took the city of York. It toppled the north. One by one, the old English kingdoms fell until only one was left standing, Wessex, and its young king, Alfred. Alfred lost battles. He paid the Vikings to leave. At his lowest point, he was hiding in a swamp, and then, in 878, he came back and beat them at a place called Edington. The peace that followed split England in two. The north and east became the Danelaw, land under Viking law, Viking words, Viking names. To this day, if an English town ends in "by", a Viking named it. Meanwhile, across the water in France, other Vikings were doing the same to the Franks. Sailing up the Seine, besieging Paris, refusing to leave. So in the year 911, the French king tried something desperate. He gave up. He handed a Viking chieftain named Rollo a whole province if only he would guard the coast and stop the raids. The land took its name from those Northmen. Normandy. Remember that name? Remember Rollo. We are going to need him at the end. Now here is the part nobody tells you. While half the Norse world was busy conquering, the other half was doing something no European had ever done. They were sailing off the edge of the map. They settled Iceland, empty and volcanic. And there, around the year 930, free farmers founded something astonishing. A parliament. The Althing. One of the oldest law assemblies on earth, and it still meets today. From Iceland, an exile named Erik the Red pushed west to a frozen island he cleverly sold as Greenland to lure settlers in. And from Greenland, his son sailed further still. His name was Leif Erikson, and around the year 1000, Leif's ships reached a green, wooded shore full of wild grapes. He called it Vinland, Wineland. It was North America. Let that land. Vikings stood in the New World. For centuries, that was just a story in an old saga, until 1961, when archaeologists found their actual camp. Turf-walled halls on the tip of Newfoundland at a place called Lance Ox Meadows, the real thing. But it gets better. In 2021, scientists worked out the exact year the Vikings were there. Here is how. In the year 993, a huge solar storm struck the Earth and left a chemical fingerprint in every living tree. The Vikings cut their camp's timber with metal tools. And 3 of those beams carried that 993 marker, plus exactly 28 rings grown after it. Do the math. The Vikings were standing in America in the year 1021. That is 471 years before Columbus ever set sail. And they were not only going west. Swedish Vikings turned east, down the great rivers of what is now Russia, a country that takes its name from them, the Rus. They traded furs and slaves for Arab silver all the way to Baghdad. They reached Constantinople, the greatest city on earth, and the toughest of them guarded the emperor himself as his elite bodyguard. Keep that bodyguard in mind. One of them is about to come home and change everything. Back in the north, the world of the Vikings was quietly ending, not by the sword, by the crown and by the cross. The age of 1,000 sea raiders was giving way to a few strong kings. In Norway, a ruler remembered as Harald Fairhair is said to have united the country after a great sea battle, by tradition around the year 872. Though historians dispute that date and see the real unification as a slow grind over generations, not one clean victory. In Denmark, a king with an unforgettable name, Harald Bluetooth, raised a giant carved stone that named Denmark for the very first time and boasted that he had made the Danes Christian. Yes, that Bluetooth. The wireless tech in your phone is named after him. Its logo is literally his initials, written in Viking runes. And as the Norse became Christian, the raiding culture that once worshipped Odin and Thor began to burn out from the inside. Kings do not plunder churches, they build them. But before the Vikings faded, one of them pulled off something staggering. Harald Bluetooth's grandson was a man named Cnut, and Cnut the Great did not just raid England, he conquered it and crowned himself king. Then he took Denmark, then Norway. One Viking, ruling a North Sea empire from 3 thrones at once. There is a famous story about him. His flatterers said he was so mighty even the sea would obey him. So he set his throne on the beach and ordered the tide to stop. It did not. The water soaked his royal feet. That was the point. Even a king is powerless before God. And no empire, however great, lasts forever. Cnut died with his sons, which brings us right back to where we started. The autumn of 1066. 3 men wanted England. The first was Harold Godwinson, the English king, crowned that January. The second was Harald Hardrada of Norway. Remember him? The Viking who had served in Constantinople and come home hungry for a throne, who believed England was his and sailed to take it. That is the battle we opened with. Stamford Bridge. The forced march, the ambush, the last great Viking dead in the English mud. It looked like total victory. And then the sails appeared in the south. The third man was William, Duke of Normandy. And here, finally, is the answer to the question I asked you at the very beginning. Normandy, land of the Northmen. William was the great-great-great-grandson of Rollo, the very Viking raider France had handed that coast to back in 911. His ancestors were the same men who once terrorized the Seine. He spoke French now. He fought on horseback now. But his blood was Norse. So look at what really happened in 1066. A Viking king of Norway invaded England and lost, and a Viking king's descendant invaded England and won. Both sides of Hastings could trace their source back to the longship. The Vikings did not lose in 1066. That is a twist. They beat themselves. And then one branch of them took the English crown and never handed it back. Every king and queen of England since sits on a throne. A Viking's great-grandson seized at Hastings. So the age that began with blood on a monastery floor ended in a field near Hastings. But the Vikings never really left. They just got quieter. Look at your own week. 4 of your days are named after Norse gods. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Thursday is literally Thor's day. Listen to yourself talk. When you say sky, egg, knife, window, husband, or law, you are speaking Old Norse, words the Vikings left behind in England. Even the words they and them are theirs. They name towns you can still visit. York, Dublin, Grimsby, Whitby. They gave Russia its name. They built one of the world's first parliaments, still sitting in Iceland. America even keeps a holiday for Leif Erikson every 9th of October. And that's the part that stays with me. The Vikings didn't end in a field near Hastings. They just went quiet, hiding in your words, your week, and your kings. You didn't just learn about them today, you inherited them. So next time you picture a Viking in a horned helmet, remember, that helmet is a costume from an opera. The real Vikings were stranger and far bigger than the cartoon. They reached America 5 centuries early. And in one wild week of 1066, they lost England to the terror of the Sea Kings and won it back with the Sea King's own grandson. 3 kings, 2 battles, 1 arrow. And the men who ended the Viking Age were Vikings all along. If that rewired how you see history, you will want to be here for the next one. Because we are leaving the cold northern seas for the golden heart of the ancient world, the Persian Empire. The superpower of its age, ruled by a man who called himself King of Kings. Subscribe, and I will see you there. The nightmare that began on one quiet island ended with a crown. Funny how history loops.